Okay, we'll call to order the September 7th, 2022 regular APCHA board meeting. First item on the agenda is roll call.
Okay, John?
Present.
Kelly?
I am here on Zoom.
Can't hear her.
Hi, everyone.
That's your thing here. I have her turned up, so it's that.
She's muted.
Here.
She's muted.
And sorry, can you hear me? I'm not muted.
In the room.
Hold on.
Give us a second, Kelly. It's us,
All right,
not you.
Kelly, it's yeah, hold on, we're going to figure this out.
She can hear us.
Yep. Right.
Kelly, can you
Kelly?
hear us?
Yeah,
Can you
she's
hear?
responding. Yeah.
Yes.
There we
Can you hear
go.
me?
Hey,
Great.
she back.
Okay.
Carson?
Yep, joining you from home today. Thanks.
Here.
Skippy?
Present.
Allison?
Present.
Okay, next item on the agenda is public comment. Not seeing any online. No one in the room. So we will move to close public comment and move to the APCHA Board of Directors comments. And we will start with Kelly.
I don't have any right now. Thank you.
Thanks, Kelly. Allison?
Also, none at this time, though maybe scooping Skippy a little to say an appreciation and empathy for anyone who went into Aspen or out of Aspen and definitely went both directions today.
Yeah, it was wonderful.
Skippy.
Yeah, I just, to comment, I just rode my bike out and back to see it all the way to the Intercept lot. I've heard it's over an hour each way, and I certainly feel for anyone and everybody dealing with that. If the bike option is available to you, it will save you a bunch of time. But mostly I want to say that although very uncomfortable, in our current configuration of infrastructure and demand, it is unavoidable. We have a bridge, it needs to be safe. We have roads, they need to work, and at some point that work needs to get done. It just has to. And
All at the same year, all the same summer?
And we had a choice to do it all at once through the peak season, where it would have been a lot longer, or to break it up in off seasons. Neither option's pretty. It's happening. There are real solutions out there to not have to deal with this.
Yeah, straight shot.
Infrastructure solutions that allow us to leave cars outside and bring people in preferable electric means of transportation, where you can be with your kids, you can be working, you can be doing other things, would significantly reduce the number of cars. And the biggest one is if we built more and higher density housing in town, people would not need to be doing this transportation. And we have that opportunity to do that, so we should be looking at those things.
Thank you, Skippy. John?
I'm gonna leave all that alone, but but you know, it's easy for people to take shots. I was taking shots at Skippy. I apologize, but
No need, that's
you
the
know,
job.
Elizabeth has written a couple articles. We have other writers that take shots at APCHA. I think we're working hard to try to bring some clarity to the program. I think Mike Kondrowski did a lot of hard work when he was here. You know, enforcing regulations and getting tough with people. There's certain things that Elizabeth has brought up that I think are reasonable. You know, we may letting more businesses own APCHA housing for employees. You know, I've done it in the free market and taken away from it for my bank. Free market for employee housing, but maybe there's a chance for certain businesses to buy more product to allow more housing. I don't disagree with the high density housing inside the core. I think that's solved a lot of solutions for Down Valley, but that's assuming people want to live in Aspen.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Right? And I don't think everybody that lives in this valley wants to live in the wonderful mecca that is Aspen.
100% true.
So with that, I think we should look at other solutions too, and changing regulations to maybe allow for businesses that have employees in Aspen a solution. I mean, I have a bank, I have a franchise value, I have to protect that, and so do other businesses. So
Agreed.
Thanks, John. Yeah, I agree with you on that. I mean, I've said it before. I mean, I think that the business ownership piece, I know there's concern about becoming a company town, but you know, I think that that can make some real sense. Nothing further for me, so with that, we'll move right along into Executive Director's comments.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for coming to see us today. The last board meeting, a couple people asked for statistics on the APCHA newsletter and how many were actually looked at. And it's probably going up because this is from last week when I talked to Slate, but over 52% of them were opened, which is actually very high for a newsletter. So I think that's great, and we're going to keep focusing on that. Speaking of Slate, they are coming to Aspen on Monday the 26th. I sent an email to some of you about having coffee and donuts with them in the morning, so I'll set that up. And a few of you can't make it, we'll try and accommodate that. That will be a quote meeting, so we will notice it, but you know, and people are welcome to come, but I don't think people are going to come visit us at 8:30 in the morning. But that will be coffee and donuts at the APCHA conference room on the 26th. And I also have spoken to Slate about getting a slide deck for board members when we want to go out and meet to the community. We're going to be working on a presentation which will kind of whiz over the high level stuff. So if we do go to like an HOA for 15 minutes, we'll have a product to walk through there. So we're working on that. And then on the 27th, we are going to the county, and we're just with them for an hour. So I think we'll go over probably the work plan, past and the new one, and then Andrew has some home trek statistics which he's going to illustrate, just sort of tell the story of where we are. I think it's basically the same presentation you saw a couple weeks ago, so there's nothing new there. The right sizing survey, we're going to start talking about that in 2 weeks, excuse me. And shout out to Liz, Liz over there, wave Liz, has done some great work, some great analysis on that. So that'll be reflected when we chat in 2 weeks. And then I am doing, through the city, I'm spending 2 months as part of a cohort doing an equity action project through Manaus, and that is focused basically on racial justice. So that'll be interesting to see how we can apply some of that both inside the organization and then how we apply the regulations. So that'll be interesting as well, and I'll let you know how that goes. And that is it. Any questions on that? Yeah.
Allison?
The APCHA offices are still closed to the
Right,
public,
right,
so
right.
does it make more sense to try and do that open meeting here?
We'll let people in. I mean, yeah. I mean,
Is
we'll just open the door if somebody comes
Okay.
in.
We have
yeah.
a doorbell.
Yeah, we have a doorbell.
So
Okay.
we still meet
Yeah,
with people
yeah.
every single day.
Yeah.
Just not walk-ins, okay.
Right,
Right.
right.
And
You
so
can't
that's
just.
out.
And they're
you
walk-ins
can't
all the
just-
time. They
you
ring the
can't-
doorbell, we ask what they want, so it's not like we're not meeting with people, because we are.
Thank you, okay, for the clarification.
So
And
people
I
aren't
haven't-
just bursting in. We're,
Yeah,
yeah,
that's over at Truscott.
yeah.
Thank you for setting
And
that up.
I'll send out a formal I just sent out an email before. I'll do actual Outlook thing for everybody, so it's on your calendar.
You said the right sizing data in 2 weeks. Are we going back to 2 week board meetings, or did you mean at that event or in our email?
No, I didn't mean at the event. When's the next board meeting?
A month from now?
The next board meeting is September.
Right.
21st.
Unless you guys only
okay.
want one, which is
Yeah.
fine with
Got it.
us,
So we are
but
having one on the
Yeah.
21st.
but it's
Yeah.
scheduled for September 21st.
Okay, and then Cindy, did you have?
We don't have anything
notifications?
new for sale this week, and I don't think we have any rentals that are gonna be advertised this week either. We do expect though, the following week, a couple of things for sale. And hopefully within the next week to 2 weeks, we will be getting a 4-bedroom for sale. So definitely sign up for the news releases or updates that you can get off of our website.
Thank you. And Kelly?
Is it possible to know where people are moving from when they win in the lottery or sign a lease with a rental? I guess I'm trying to figure out how many folks that are coming from out of Pitkin County that meet the qualifications that are moving into Pitkin County.
let me check that out. That's an interesting data point, yeah.
I know that we do ask why somebody's like selling. We have where they're currently living. I do not think we keep track of that. But when they bid, we know where they currently are. We just don't have that specific information where we can just grab it out.
Sure. It will just help for the broader policy conversation about, getting workers living closer to their jobs, right? So that's why it's interesting to me. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Kelly. All right, we will move on to the consent calendar. The only item are the minutes of the August 17th, 2022 regular meeting. Any additions, changes, or motion to approve?
I have a clarification question.
Okay,
And I liked these minutes. I don't know if someone else wrote them, but I thought they were slightly more detailed, which is helpful and just good for transparency.
That was something we're going to be working on. So.
I got a conscious effort.
Yeah.
Thank you, Matthew. There's the point that I think we still do have an APCHA board vacancy for that position open. I don't see it on APCHA, on our Facebook, on the county. So I would love, again, to just have that noticed so that, I think that's why we reopened it, because people who maybe thought they were going up against an incumbent now have an open, more people would consider putting their name in. And so if they don't know that that is available, we won't get that objective. So I would love to see that a couple places.
Well, I'd like to know if I was reappointed. And then we do have an open position as well, right?
The alternate position. I'll check on this with both the city and the county to find out what's going on
So I
with
don't
that.
think, traditionally, do we advertise, or does it go through the city? And
The city and the county
Right.
advertise it,
But
because
we'll-
that's where they
we'll
have
bug
to sign
them
up for
to-
it.
Yeah,
We'll
just put it on
double check.
Facebook. Hey, there's a position open and the link
Yeah.
to the county. Why not open that up? So then if that's still unclear, I guess that would be my one thing about the minutes, because that does kind of say blatantly that that's what's happening. So I don't know if that needs an adjustment or.
all right. So let's see, where was that?
For the director's comment, I made the comment, and Kelly both said that. Right?
Okay, but so do we talk about that at the meeting? Can we make that addition, or is that something just to?
It is in the minutes.
Right, it says it's happening.
People,
That it's
and people,
reopened.
and people don't read our minutes anyway, even though they're online, to tell you the
Okay.
truth. But I'll make sure that.
It really is
yeah,
open.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Cindy.
Okay. All right, so then we would have, is there a motion to approve with the addition as amended by Allison?
I'll motion to approve with that one clarification, just internally for staff. Thanks.
Motion, second?
I'll second.
Second from John, and it's a roll call vote.
Okay. Kelly?
Yes.
Thank you. John?
Yes.
Carson?
Yes.
Allison?
Yes.
Skippy?
Yes. Motion passes. Okay, next item is presentation by Ben Anderson. So Ben, thank you. We're way ahead of schedule. Thank you for being here early.
Any spot's better than the other?
Go ahead and sit there. I can do the.
Okay, cool.
Wow, what were we going to talk about that whole time?
Go, as soon as it's up, take it away.
Okay, great. Thank you, Mr. Chair and Board of Directors. For the record, Ben Anderson, Planner with Community Development. I know most of you have talked with you in your positions on this board previously on other topics. I think it's, and I apologize to Skippy and Allison who have seen these slides numerous times. I have a very short presentation for you this evening. And really the objective is just to have a discussion about some of the things that we did in response to the moratorium the City Council declared back in December of 2021 that have some intersection with the work that you folks are doing. And in the kind of furtherance of our, I think our community affordable housing goals, and I think our shared desire to, have a more robust affordable housing program. We used the tools that we have in the land use code to try to respond to some of the questions that council asked us to respond to as we came up with regulations. So I just wanted to talk with you a little bit about some of the things that we did at a high level, give you a chance to ask any questions that you may have, and I also kind of wanted to conclude with just some of the work that we're continuing to work on, kind of as a follow-up to the moratorium, particularly related to the Affordable Housing Credits Program. So with that, you can go ahead. So just very quickly, and please stop me. I'll be as brief as I can and give time for any questions that you might have. The first thing that we did was update our fee in lieu. This is a number that used to live with APCHA, going back into our community's affordable housing history. It's lived in the land use code since 2015, I believe. And 2 years ago, we did a full recalculation of the fee in lieu. And importantly, the construction numbers that we used were for 2019, 2020. We thought we were doing a really good job. And obviously, that dynamic in our community has changed dramatically over the last couple of years. But in response to that, built into the land use code is an annual update. And as part of the kind of outcomes of the moratorium, we did a separate ordinance for this particular piece. Based on this engineering news record National Construction Cost Index, which was recommended to us by our consultants who did the study a couple of years ago, to use that as an annual benchmark to see what was happening nationally with construction costs. We updated by nearly 8.5%. Just to give you some sense of what's happened the last couple of years, and 2019, 2020, 2021, through 2021, going back in time, annual increases are much more parallel to those numbers than what transpired in the last year. So significant increase, probably doesn't get to acknowledge the change in costs that we've experienced in the community the last couple of years, but we think it was a good conservative step. In terms of the intersection with APCHA policy on this, I do want to just bring to your attention, if you weren't aware, that the fee in lieu is really importantly linked to the rental rates and ownership, the rental prices and ownership rates that you charge within your guidelines on new homes that are being built. And so when we do this calculation, it is an acknowledgement of the full cost, land and construction. And then subtracted from that is kind of projected revenue coming from the sale of a unit, or for, I think, a 15-year period of rental income coming from that. So as you folks contemplate rental rates and ownership prices within your system, it does translate to eventual impact in the fee in lieu. Any questions on this before we move on to the next topic? Okay. The other thing we did was to change the way that we calculate affordable housing mitigation for single-family and duplex residences. Again, this whole system used to live in APCHA's rules and regulations, and again moved into the land use code, I think in 2015. There's several elements, and I have a slide that kind of identify the elements of this, but the big change that we made was to include basements and garages in the calculation of affordable housing mitigation, and in demolition scenarios to include the square footage of the existing residence. We were having significant redevelopment projects, a 2,500 square foot home going to a 10,000 square foot home gross, and almost no affordable housing mitigation provided because of the kind of exclusion of basements, garages, and existing floor area. And so that calculation has been around for a long time. I think for our development community, this is going to be an adjustment. I will say the other thing that we did, though, is that if someone's simply doing an addition of their home, we did reduce the generation rate for new floor area from 0.16 FTEs per 1,000 square feet down to just below 0.11 FTEs per 1,000 square feet. So if somebody's doing an addition, not tearing down their home, not adding a huge basement under their property, but maybe adding a garage or maybe adding an extra bedroom, we've actually reduced the mitigation cost for those kinds of projects. The real change is in a redevelopment scenario. The other thing that was quite a topic as we discussed these issues with the community was the state of our deferral agreement, and this is a responsibility that APCHA and community development share. The rules kind of live in the land use code now, but Cindy and APCHA have been kind of managing these deferral agreements, but there has been some concern that the language over time has not been as precise as it needs to be. For locals who are entering into these agreements, there was uncertainty about what they'd be on the hook for should rules in the land use code change over time, and so we did make some changes to that to bring more certainty to people who are engaging in these deferral agreements.
So
Please.
explain the deferral agreement, I guess.
So if you are a working local resident as defined by APCHA, and you redevelop your home, and you, let's say that in the calculation that we do, you are on the hook for 0.5 FTEs as your mitigation requirement based on the calculations in our land use code. If you qualify as a working local, you can enter an agreement to defer that mitigation requirement to the sale of the home to a non-local working resident at some point in the future. So if you were to pass on your home to your child in the future, and that person was a local working resident, they could defer into the future as far out as the house was still being occupied by a local working resident. In the past, the requirements, one, they've changed over time in these deferral agreements, just the language has shifted, but folks were concerned that as we were increasing the overall mitigation requirements based on the calculations that were changing, that the value of that was really uncertain for them in the future. Should we make significant changes to the fee in lieu? Should we make significant changes to sort of other mitigation calculations within the land use code? So the way that this now works under the current code is that 0.50 FTEs gets locked in at the time that you're, and the valuation of that based on the current fee in lieu gets locked in at the time of the deferral agreement. And then rather that then be subject, the future valuation of that be subject to a future land use code, it's now a calculation based on CPI of that valuation when your mitigation was due year to year going forward. So it was an effort not to waive that mitigation requirement, but to bring certainty to it for folks that were entering.
Well, so like somebody, say, Cemetery Lane, you got a duplexable lot, you build a duplex, you live in one side, your kid lives in the other side or something. If you signed a deferral agreement, and then the kid decided to sell, at that point of the sale, which would be a free market sale, right?
Yeah.
The mitigation would have to be paid by the buyer as part of that purchase.
Yeah, and it's recorded, it shows up in title work, okay. And you folks have done a really great job over time of keeping track of that.
But only if it's sold if they sold it to another working local in that deferment. I was saying all kinds of weird stuff before I turned this on. But, only if it's sold to a non-working local. If
right.
You're sold it to another non-working local, you could roll that deferment forward.
And the general concept has been around since the community first started assessing mitigation on residential.
Okay.
Going back into the late 80s, I believe.
And I actually have a list, and once in a while, I will pull that list out, and I will go to the assessor's website to make sure that those people are still owners. Even though there's a
Hopefully
recorded
you're
document on the
recorded,
property.
Hopefully it
Yeah.
doesn't slide through title.
It should,
Yeah, no,
I know.
it shouldn't slide through title.
No, it shouldn't.
I can go through this really quickly, but essentially there's these levers of what we changed, and really the big change was what we're counting in terms of floor area. We reduced the generation rate, and we did increase the fee in lieu, but that's kind of all code directed. So anyway, next slide, please. And then lastly, just to kind of show you in a scenario what that translates into, going back to 2013, the methodology was kind of went way back in, I think into the 90s in APCHA guidelines, where the generation per 1,000 square feet was 0.33 FTEs. There was a study done in 2015 where that generation dropped down to 0.16 FTEs. We've dropped that, but again, that delta down at the bottom of the kind of FTEs and translation to fee and lieu, the real change with that is the regulation that just changed about how we calculate floor area. That was the primary change that we just engaged. But this same project from 3 months ago, it's essentially a fourfold increase in affordable housing mitigation by counting the basements and including existing floor area. So a significant change particularly for redevelopment scenarios. Okay, next slide, thanks. This is one that I'm particularly excited about, and a lot of communities have tried this elsewhere and have run into obstacles, and I think it's going to bring a lot of predictability to both public sector and private sector affordable housing development. Currently in the land use, or previous to these changes in the land use code, no matter how compliant an affordable housing project was with the land use code, it still required a board review with P&Z or with HPC to get through the path. And so we were subjecting affordable housing projects to a different scrutiny of review than, say, a free market residential project. And this kind of brings parity to those types of development processes. But if we have sort of agreed that the land use code reflects kind of community interests around density, intensity, those kinds of things, we have observed recently that just the presence of a process, subjects these types of projects to community scrutiny that really isn't even the review criteria that we're reviewing these projects against. And so if a project is fully compliant with underlying zone district requirements, parking, they're not asking for any variances, they're not pursuing a plan development, it's now an administrative review. And additionally, we've put in place some process to still accommodate projects that are historically designated. And I will say the private sector affordable housing projects that we're seeing right now are all in some way associated with a designated historic property. I was just looking at one today that's really exciting. 3 blocks from downtown, 21 new bedrooms, no public sector investment in a project. So I think trying to streamline the review process for those kinds of projects, I think is going to make some of them much more viable than they currently are. Okay.
Are you saying that in that case it would still go to HPC?
Well, they, unfortunately for this particular project, and we tried to work with their architects to figure out how to make it happen, but one of the requirements that we do have in the land use code is that all units have to be at least 50% above grade. And they had 4 of their units that were at like 46% above grade and 49% above grade. And so they're actually asked, they have to go through special review,
Okay.
which then translates into a board review in that case. But
Like the Silouan property would not have gone in front of HPC.
that's correct. They would have had jurisdiction over the resource itself. They would not have had jurisdiction over the new construction as long as it was compliant with the underlying zoning.
Thank you.
The other thing that we did, and this has gotten some discussion in the press, and just to be sure, we do not think that people are going to be taking advantage of this in the heart of the West End. But there are residential properties that are a little unusual in different parts of town that might be ripe for a triplex or a fourplex. It's 100% affordable. That can be done by right now. We do not change height or other dimensional standards like floor area to accommodate these things. They would have to be done with the sort of allowable floor area that was sort of on those lots for a single family or duplex. But you could, if you're pursuing a 100% affordable project, pursue a triplex or a fourplex in the R6 and the R15. We also have some properties around town, older multifamily properties that are on that are non-conforming uses in the R6 and R15. So what that means is we don't allow multifamily typically in R6 and R15. So these are projects that were built back in the 70s or 80s that are aging. And by being a non-conforming use, they're kind of locked into exactly what they have. They can't really change. If they tear down, they have to go away. And so for projects that are 100% affordable, we gave some flexibility to that. And then we also kind of went through the land use code with a fine-tooth comb and made sure that we weren't that things that had been done previously in an unintentional way that precluded affordable housing development in certain zone districts, we got rid of all of that stuff. And so those were sort of the big things that we did. Next slide, please. Yeah, that's what I just said. And then the mixed-use zone district. This was a topic that I think was of particular interest to a couple of council members. We had previously done this in other commercial zone districts, but along Main Street particularly, we had continued to see conversion of commercial properties and some multifamily properties into single-family residential. And City Council wanted to preclude that in the same way that they had previously in other zone districts. That does not preclude affordable housing development along Main Street. It simply precludes the conversion of particularly currently commercial buildings into new free market residential single family. So that's the affordable housing stuff that we did in response to the moratorium. Certainly the topic of free market demolition has been very much in the paper, and there's an interesting article from Paul Mentor today that discussed this. So it's continuing to be a topic, but I will say long term, I think some of the things that we did around affordable housing is perhaps going to be even, I think, more impactful than some of those policies. So I'm happy to answer any questions. I did provide a summary document for you that kind of outlines everything that we did during the moratorium. But either discuss today or offline, I'm happy to sort of answer any questions that you might have.
Awesome.
That last point, you're saying they can't convert to a free market single-family home, but if they wanted to do a mixed-use, like free market apartments in order to pay off, like have affordable housing,
Yeah,
that would be allowed?
It could be a mix. It could be a mixed development. Yeah, it's the single family. It's a single family use that's been new. I mean, if it's an existing
Sure.
single family, those can continue. Those remain conforming uses, but you can't establish new.
Sure.
So I had a question just on the multifamily that was on a non-conforming lot. So
Mhm.
if there was a, like, say, a 10-unit property that was on a zone single-family lot, what would prevent that from just being scraped and put a single-family house on it?
Certainly, they could do that by choice.
Yeah.
And I think previously the land use code encouraged that because you're getting rid of something that's non-conforming in a zone district, and we don't like non-conformities typically. But I'll just identify a couple specific properties. As you go out of town, out the east side of town, on Cooper, there's 1235 East Cooper that's been recently in the newspaper. Mark Hunt is in transaction with the school district, and then right next door is a property owned by the hospital, a former lodge. Both of them are in the R6 zone district. And both of those, we've had extensive conversations with both of the entities that own those properties, and trying to figure out solutions moving forward to sort of making minor changes, to making it more affordable, adding additional units out there. And because they were non-conforming, they couldn't do anything. And so in those circumstances, particularly with aging properties, it's much more likely with the valuation of things and I think the desirability for new free market residential, I think it was much more likely that those properties were going to revert to that without some flexibility being granted, that there was a path towards something other than that. And hopefully, some of the flexibility that we created will give an alternative path to the demolition of what are currently non-conforming uses.
Yeah, because to me, I think, you've got a lot of those, there's dwindling number of those left, right? But I think when you lose those 10, 12, 16 unit places that are functioning as effectively free market affordable housing, right? I mean, that's a huge blow to locals, right? Because that's oftentimes locals that are living there. And I guess I'm just sort of wondering if there's a way to sort of incentivize that to make the economics such that the highest and best use is keeping it as multifamily, right?
Yeah.
So, I mean, I don't know, you would know the answer to that far better than I, but it seems to me like if there's a way to accomplish that, right, it maintains housing and perhaps at little or no cost.
Yeah, no, we agree with that description entirely, and it's the sort of philosophy behind a lot of the thinking that we tried to engage in. I will say on the 1235 East Cooper project, it was really back and forth whether or not that was going to happen. And I will say that APCHA staff and ComDev staff worked really hard with the parties involved to make sure that that was going to happen. And it took some flexibility on both of our parts. They're really nice units that I'm glad are going to be filled with teachers eventually. But I think it's going to be flexibility, particularly for these aging multifamily properties, whether they're in a non-conforming zone district or they're sitting in residential multifamily. There's real challenges to redeveloping those properties under current code. Back in the 80s, we put this set of regulations in place called multifamily replacement, which I think was trying to encourage trying to keep those multifamily units either practically affordable or affordable by deed restriction over time. But what it's really done is kind of lock those properties into time. And so we are looking at those regulations as well to try to figure out flexibility on those sort of aging sort of multifamily to try to give some flexibility. I will say if they want to convert to 100% affordable and pull credits out of that, that's a really easy process to engage in.
Right.
They might have to do some upgrades to make sure that they can come into the APCHA inventory and be sound units, but the land use process associated with that is really easy. The complexity becomes if you want to do a sort of a mix of free market and affordable and that kind of stuff. That's where it gets a little tricky.
Well, if there was any way, I mean, again, right, if there's any way for us to, if it was some sort of a multiplier on credits, right, just to make the economics where you give somebody, if they have that property, they're going to do what's going to make them the most money. And if there's a way for us to accomplish that, or if there's things that we can do as a board that would help that, certainly be interested in that.
Yeah, just as I followed them, and Ben and I, we've all had a lot of conversations around that. Hi, I'm replacing Rachel. You can tell now. My question is saying, I've had a lot of conversation with Ben and other staff and all of city council around exactly that. And, I speak to developers all the time who are local and say all the time, we'd much prefer to be building this, but for our investors, it's the math equation. Right. And we need to make that equation work. And so that is sort of the next step of our work. But to reflect that to you, Ben, and maybe as a question as a board member here, as opposed to a city council member, could we get some thinking from city staff around that and a list of perhaps recommendations of policy decisions that this board could make to play our role in balancing that equation? Because I think this board would be very interested, but it would help to have your professional guidance on that.
No, certainly, and the consultant team that we worked with during the moratorium from Design Workshop, they have a gentleman on their staff who really understands development economics really well, has done some really great work with us on the multifamily replacement topic, and it's a great transition. Like, I think our next big sort of study and wanting to make some changes is around improvements to the Affordable Housing Credits Program. Mm-hmm. In my view, kind of redevelopment, taking advantage of some of these aging multifamily properties and figuring out creative solutions there. I think the credits program is probably the path through that. Mm-hmm. I will say intersection with APCHA, desires for different kinds of units and the way that the land use code intersects with the deed restriction process. Like, we've had folks that want us to think about issuing affordable housing credits for RO units. We currently don't. Issuing affordable housing credits for Category 5 units. We currently don't. I think that those kinds of changes, where we allow credits to be generated, maybe the urban growth boundary isn't the right geography for that. Maybe there's some flexibility around that. So I think that as we sort of acknowledge, I think the economic challenges of developing affordable housing, I think there seems to be an openness in the community for some greater flexibility than we once had. Yeah. I think we had this system pretty locked down for good reason, And I think we're finding that we need to sort of bring some new ideas and flexibility that maybe the community once had and we sort of pushed aside for one reason or the other. But, you know, I think the other big thing, whether it's on a, you know, I think one of the things on the, if you've followed the newspaper at all over the last few months, we're having a fairly significant supply and demand issue in the credits program right now. You can't get an affordable housing credit. They're out in the market, but they're not easily available. And, or maybe people aren't willing to sell them. But we've got to figure out how to boost that program. We've got some projects in the pipeline. But like one of the things that we know, if that program's going to be successful over time and it's going to be sustainable over time, we've got to figure out a mechanism to have banks and financial institutions recognize the value of the credits beyond just a piece of paper that the city of Aspen issues that nobody really understands what they're worth.
Hey, I've went on TDRs. There's value in these credits as well.
They are.
The other part is you got HOAs that are restricting
Yep.
further affordable housing in their neighborhoods.
That's true. And then I think that one of the issues that APCHA I know is concerned about is you know, the expenses associated with HOA dues and properties that are primarily free market for sort of affordable. There's lots of challenges to overcome, but you know, I think the credits program, I think some flexibility in the multifamily replacement sort of requirements are some tools that we could work on together to find some new opportunities that we currently don't have.
Good, well, that's encouraging and timely, and, I mean, I think, because once the properties are gone, they're gone, and you know, I mean, you know, personally, if people could make a lot of money developing affordable housing without any involvement from anybody here, I think that's a win for everyone.
Yeah.
Kelly, did you have a question?
I have a question and then two just ideas I've been contemplating. So my question, and hi Ben, sorry I'm not there in person. Thanks for all your great work on this. I know it was a heavy lift for you guys. And I'm wondering, are there zones in the city where single family would not be allowed? Like where a single family home is a non-conforming use?
Or like a lodge.
Downtown.
Yeah, yes. New single-family homes are not allowed in most of our commercial zone districts. That's happened gradually over time. Started in the CC and in C1 and NC, kind of around the kind of neighborhoods that flank the core. Certainly in the lodge zone districts, you can't sort of build kind of new. I mean, if they're existing, they're non-conforming uses, they're kind of locked in time, but you can't build new. And that's similarly what we just did on Main Street in the mixed-use zone district. Is if they're there, they can exist, but you can't build new.
And that non-conformity would go away under a demolition scenario?
That's correct.
Okay, thank you. And then two other things I just want to throw out. You know, one of the things that I think about not as kind of an expansion of the credits program, but I would see that APCHA might have a role in the future if this ever were to take hold, is similar to the equity program that the county has, that I really think would be interesting if the community broadly contemplated it. And this would be an opportunity, I think, for employers to actually get a better play. And that's where, you know, there's public money matched with private investment into what are current, it's like a buy down for current free market units. And then, you know, the worker, whoever, has their appreciation capped but committed, and then the employer or whoever, like a trust or something that's involved in the equity, takes on both the risk and the gain. I'd be interested in if we could have a broader conversation about this in the community about rolling out such a type of program, because I do think that it could create investment income, but it also could create a direct path for both employers and for those people who are just sort of pricing out at the upper RO categories or beyond. So something to think about. And then just I'll throw a really tangential thought out there. I've been contemplating for a couple of years about the utility of a public bank that I think, I find to be a really interesting idea that could help leverage affordable housing resources to better benefit here. So those are two things.
Can I ask a follow-up, Kelly?
Mm-hmm.
The first idea, I'm just trying to make sure I understand it correctly. So you're saying that there's a unit, say there's just a 2-bedroom condo, it's free market. A employer wants to have it for its employees, so they go and buy it, and in exchange for a RO deed restriction, so they still have appreciation, but appreciation capped by a smaller market dynamic. They get assistance in that buy down from, in this case, the county. And then forever going forward, there's that deed restriction. We know an employee's there, but the employer is also benefiting from appreciation in the sense that it's an RO restriction without a limit on sale other than who they sell it to. Yeah. Okay, cool. Awesome.
Yeah, similar to that. And, we do it with a county and our employee are the two entities entering into the contract. I could see it if it's more of a community trust where you have like multiple investors that create that pot of money that are taking the risk and benefiting on the gain. Whereas either the employer or an employee are providing that limited capped portion of the investment.
Oh, so rather than working with an individual employer, the employers would sort of buy into a pool of access.
Right.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, I mean, I think,
Good work.
sure. I mean, I think as a starting point, that conversation needs to be had. And at the council table, at least, we've been having a lot of discussion kind of in the periphery, knowing it's a next step conversation around that buy down. And we've talked about paired buy down with redevelopment, single family to multifamily, using exactly the tools you're talking about. So I think we're talking all about digging into the same toolkit, and we need to refine what exactly that mix looks like for our community. But I think it's a discussion that at the council table we're now ready to have, that we're through the moratorium. Sounds like this board's eager to have, and it's one that we can't have soon enough, as Carson said, because we're probably.
I just would say because it resolves the issue that the city identified of like the city or any governmental partner solely being responsible for those buy downs is just too much, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's too much to put on the table. And that's why it's not a high priority strategy.
Yeah.
It's cost 2 times more than building a new unit. So if you have multiple shareholders in that purchase, then it reduces, I think, that upfront cost.
Yeah, not dissimilarly from the new state level, kind of affordable housing or middle income housing investment bank that passed recently as a similar mechanism of funding. It's interesting. Thanks.
Allison?
Can we get these slides in our minutes packet or sent to us? I appreciate pulling the affordable housing aspect out specifically. I also like the thing that was in our packet. And 2 clarifications. Those subgrade rules that you were talking about, that is just a land use code thing, or that is only pertinent to 100% affordable multi-unit development?
It is a requirement of having a unit either meet a mitigation requirement or being able to pull credits. And I think it was a response to, we were seeing projects for mitigation where, going back in the past, and this rule's been in place for probably 7 or 8 years prior to my time at the city, and it's really the only, just to kind of parse it out a little bit, it's the only unit quality requirement that's in the land use code. Most of the unit quality requirements are in the APCHA development policy. But it is this thing that I think we wanted to, when it was included, to try to make sure that affordable housing units weren't in basements without sort of adequate light and ventilation.
Yeah, the developer would give away the dogs.
Yeah.
I absolutely appreciate, the workforce having a standard of living and us requiring that. It does seem like if that was back in APCHA regulations, then the board would have some ability to like do a special review and give someone a pass, or to change that. Like, is 48% really that much worse than 50%? Especially if it's like, I don't even know, like the bedroom versus your huge living space is all above ground, but 40, so not that these people shouldn't be sent back to the drawing board and work on it, but knowing that that is one thing that might halt good, new, affordable housing coming online, I wonder if there's something that could be discussed from the board.
Well, you don't, just to let you know, the board no longer reviews land use referrals.
Right.
Because the city because we have elected officials on it. So, I actually reviewed that one, and mostly which I had really no problem at all with them being a little bit less than, or a little bit more than 50% below grade, because it's basically the bedrooms are below. So
Right.
the actual living.
Yeah.
So you kind of look at that. You look at would you totally lose this project as well? And it's something that, is it worth, if it's not that big of a difference, is it worth still approving something like this? And in most cases, when it's not that big of a difference, just like sizes, because
Right.
we have units that don't fit our maximum or our minimum requirement of sizes as well, but we allow a 20% reduction in that as well. And again, you kind of see how the layout is, and more than likely, it's still a wonderful project, so you go ahead and you recommend approval for it.
And I guess then that just triggers the additional reviews. It's instead of just the administrative review.
And I will just say on this project, for example,
Yeah.
it's not like it's coming in without a staff recommendation of support. It's just that the land use code sets up this additional level of review
Okay.
if it doesn't meet this sort of bright line standard.
And is it, in this case for the subgrade, is it like size where it's a 20% plus or minus?
It's not. There's a bright line of 50% above and below as kind of the minimum standard, and if it crosses that threshold by even minimal amounts, and all of these units were within 5%, and it's sometimes we build too much inflexibility into the land use code.
But there's a committee that could allow it even though it's hit that.
Oh yeah, I mean
Okay.
the special review will be done by H.P.C.
It will be, okay.
It will be, but it does preclude it from moving
track.
through that administrative review path.
Okay, that doesn't actually concern me as much. The credits program, you do not get to start selling those credits to other developers until your stuff is finished in development, correct?
We have, as a mechanism to try to help smaller projects that were maybe self-financed, we have a provision to allow for kind of a 30%, 40%. So foundation, excavation, foundation, framing, sort of at different stages in the building
Okay.
permit, and then at CO you get the full amount. So it does sort of allow sort of this phased issuance if somebody wants to pursue that. We have not had anybody pursue that yet, but it used to be entirely at certificate of occupancy
Okay.
after the project was completed and the deed restriction is recorded, but we do now have a path for people to get kind of a phased issuance of those throughout the construction process
Okay.
with a bond.
Okay. I thought for some reason Park and Park already those TDR started selling, or so I'm glad to hear that it hasn't, because obviously we lost a lot of local housing on something like that. That was 10 plus units in that zone. But there's also a lot of times where you could have the hole in the ground and then years of nothing moving, and that guy already made his money.
Yeah.
So I do appreciate it sounds like we usually need flexibility more than less flexibility, but that does concern me just a little bit, because the original guy got his stuff planned, he made someone dig a hole, and then like you can sell those for so much for the people who actually need them for a big hotel, for instance.
Yes, for
Right,
instance.
but you said you require a bond,
We
right?
do as
So-
require that. There's a financial guarantee,
Yeah, right.
either a letter of credit or
Yeah, that's what I
a
was just
bonding
gonna
mechanism if somebody wants to engage in that process.
Yeah, I mean, to me, like I would say, I mean, you talked about financing and recognizing these things, and how do you make that work? I mean, to me, more flexibility. I mean, personally, I mean, I'd be in favor of give them 100%, right? Give them 100% up front. They get their cash. That's going to help them develop the property quicker. And then you've got the bond or the letter of credit on the back end that if they don't perform, right, you can execute on that, and you still, right, I mean, you've got your money to then go in and finish the project.
That's an interesting concept. We're thinking of all kinds of
Yeah.
ways to try to make the credits a more predictable part of a pro forma.
Right. I mean, because from a lender's perspective, right, they see the
Equity.
dollars up front, you know it's real, because here's the money,
Yeah.
right?
We're
That's
th-
an equity component. of it.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's an interesting idea. I think we've been contemplating much more of a either guaranteeing purchase from the city. So if somebody, got credits and there was a guarantee from the city, either again through a bonding mechanism or from direct funds from, say, the 150 fund, so sort of as a sort of guaranteed backstop to give some certainty to the value of those. But that's an interesting idea as well.
Buyer of the units, not the credits.
Yeah.
Right? That's what you're saying?
Yeah.
Right, on the example you gave with the grading,
Yeah.
do they have the opportunity to just partially regrade the site around the? No.
People.
People do that already.
You could be a developer, Skippy.
Seems like the easier thing to just there's a window.
Yeah, just do some scraping. It's the way that we measure that kind of thing is a little bit more restrictive than that to accomplish a great idea. And it's definitely been proposed.
It's only like
Definitely been proposed. I want to be respectful to Cindy's generously offering me 20 minutes. I think we've gone significantly past that. I'm happy to continue to talk if you guys want to talk. I'm happy to answer any questions offline. And I'm also, as you folks explore some of these things, I'm happy to come back at any time and talk with you about any of this stuff. So again, I don't want to sort of cut off the conversation, but I want to be
So some of this
respectful
stuff
to
with
your
affordable housing, I think you could get a bank to do we're talking about, right, you've got somebody, the credits are important for their equity stack. If they can sell the credits or not sell the credits, if you have a pre-sale, the project is all affordable. I mean, it's not exactly a tax credit deal, but I think you could get a bank to finance a fairly sizable, significant 90%, construction type deal. If you had the pre-sale, your borrower had the credits. I mean, that's a CD loan, I'm thinking, community development loan, which is, banks are looking for those.
Do you know anybody that works at a bank?
I know I would do it, so I'm just saying, I think there's a way to get it done.
Yeah, well, as we explore the credits market further, we'll put you on our list.
I mean, I'm just saying that because tax credit deals are coveted by a lot of banks.
For sure.
This isn't exactly a tax credit deal, but I think you have sources of repayment that are significant and, substantially repay the
Absolutely,
deal.
yeah.
Yeah.
Good. Any other questions for Ben? Well, thank you. Very, very helpful, very timely. Great information. Really excited to see that you guys are taking a lot of this into consideration. Like I said, we've got a short fuse on how much longer a lot of these properties are going to be around, and for me, it's very exciting to see you taking it on. So thanks.
Well, thank you, and really appreciate the conversation. And again, happy to come talk about any of this stuff further if you have desire.
Thank you, Ben.
Thanks, Ben.
Thank you.
Thanks, Ben.
Okay, we will move on to the review of 2022-2023 work plan. Matthew.
What are you going to be working on?
Maybe you tell me that. So we ran over last year's work plan in the last meeting, and then you guys had input on the new one. Go down one more, Manny. Yeah, there. Okay. So there was lots of good discussion, and then I pushed back on you slightly and said, "That's great, but we're keeping this kind of high level, so thank you very much." So what we did change, we added was on the community engagement, right down to those last couple ones there, community listening sessions. Thanks, Manny. And education outreach on rights and responsibilities as APCHA owner-renter. So those are the little tweaks we made. And then, we also enjoyed discussing the overall themes, but those on the actual written document, those are what we came up with.
Was there any movement on any kind of budget request for a share or
We're not.
contract?
We weren't. I
Comms
said
person.
we wanted to look at how we were going. I took it on board that spend freely under the current parameters, but I didn't think that there was enough there for a full-time person yet. So we were going to look at that for like next year and see how we're doing.
Like a 2023 ask for a
Right,
2024
maybe,
position.
maybe.
see.
I didn't think that there was enough there right now for a full-time person, so we shelved that.
Is there any, I mean, I guess we have stuff in the budget for comms consultants though, because we have those.
There isn't actually a line item right now for communications, but we have sufficient in the budget. So that would, again, be something that for next year. Do we want a line item, or even a position? But right now, we don't have a specific carve-out, so we are just taking that out of the general fund.
Is it anticipated that we will continue to pay Slate, I guess, in 2023?
Yeah,
Okay.
I mean, that's, yeah. Until we decide to make a change, that's what we're doing.
Okay.
Yeah. So,
Kelly?
Yeah, this is sort of building off a question I raised the last time, but I'm thinking more about. And that question was, do we have a sense of like what a fully staffed APCHA would look like? But I guess now my question is a bit broader. Do we have a sense of what a fully resourced APCHA would look like? In terms of like what the budgetary request, because I think about something like this HOA capital reserves, and to me, like that would I would think that would require hiring like a consultant to do a fully comprehensive reserve study. So have we built out based on our even bigger strategic plan and year-by-year work plans, what the full resources might be to achieve these long-term objectives?
I don't think we have. I mean, we've been doing it based on the resources we have, and I have a request in for a compliance person, a new compliance person, but I don't think we've taken it beyond that.
We have talked about
we've
this.
talked about that person.
Yeah, when we've talked about the capital reserves, depending on what type of program we're looking at, more than likely we would need somebody who has some type of construction background to help us and to work with the HOAs. But that's something that we still need a program first before we move forward on something like that. And that's still a year, 2 years, something like that down the line.
But Kelly, going back to your really brought up, what would the ideal APCHA look like in terms of resources and funding? I don't. That's almost more like a philosophical question than a.
Well, I guess I'm thinking of it in terms of like here would be an analogy.
Yeah.
When Pitkin County kind of was put in the position to like develop a public health department, the state essentially was like, we did this public health assessment, all these counties need to pull it together and put together a public health department that's going to focus on these things, and you need to do it over a 5-year period. We sort of had to figure out like what does a fully staffed public health department look like? What are the resources that it would take? And we knew that, and so over time, that infrastructure can get built and resourced, and so that's what I'm wondering if that type of work for APCHA is something that we want to consider prioritizing so that we can begin to move towards it. Over some time horizon, or at least lay out the picture to our boards who are funding APCHA and the community as to like, hey, this is where we would get if we wanted to work on everything, and this is the distance between where we're at now and that place. So I throw that out there as for consideration.
Yeah, Kelly, I think that's a really interesting point. I mean, to me, I think if you had somebody with that construction background that could be, a free resource to an HOA about even understanding what are our capital reserve deficiencies, right? And then they could help us to figure out the best way to try and solve that. I mean, to me, I think that would be money very, very well
But
spent.
I'm talking about even bigger, like APCHA
Yeah.
as an organization. You know, I just want to be clear about that. And
Yeah.
using capital reserves is just one example.
Yeah,
So
but
thanks.
right. I think. I mean, I think. Yeah, I think that's an excellent point. I think you got to start somewhere, and I think it's. I don't know. I think that would be a good place to start to try and understand some of the problems.
You know, free market, hiring a free market builder to do your plumbing.
Yeah, right. Exactly.
It goes a little bit to hiring a free market plumber to do your plumbing in your house or repair.
Right.
You know, versus having an APCHA staff position that's somewhat subsidized by APCHA, being able to come over and do your repairs or your maintenance, your roof, whatever it is,
Right.
for some more normal cost.
Right,
I
but if
guess.
you hired, like, I mean, again, right, and I understand Kelly's talking about even bigger picture, but I'm like, if you started with that example, right, you'd make that investment, cost $100,000 or whatever, right, then you would have a good understanding of even the size of the problem and what it's gonna take to try and even start to affect that. And
Sure.
I've said it before, I mean, one of the things I took away when we did, as a board, we went and did the Habitat for Humanity, and I was talking to one of the framers down there, and the framer said, I said, how did you get working for Habitat for Humanity as a framer? And he said, I had my own framing business, and I was running up and down the valley every day, and trying to run a business, trying to hire employees, right, trying to manage everything within a framing subcontractor. And he said, I had 2 young kids, I wanted stability. And he said, I took a little bit of a pay and cut, but now he still gets to do what he loves. He gets, a consistent job, and he's not running himself ragged, So I think there's people that would potentially be interested in something like that.
Mm-hmm.
I would love to hear from, I guess, staff about that concept, Kelly. I think it's really helpful. Obviously, like, when I started coming to these meetings 6 years ago, if that had been a topic, we would be fully staffed now. And I know it's not like if you have the 5-year plan, you get it, but like, I think part of the same conversations with the wheels spinning is because we're plugging so many holes. And so I guess I'm curious, are we sinking so fast that we have to keep looking at the holes, or is there any sort of time or room for that broad philosophical, absolutely, but like achievable probably once we know it, questioning of the full functioning of this department?
And I don't know about Matthew, but I know that is stuff that we, in the past, has always been on the back burner, but it's something that we've discussed. It would be great to have a list of people who, or a certain list where when somebody needs a new roof, there's 2 roofers. This one can be pulled over to this, and they know that they're going to get these deed restricted housing business. And it's again finding the person who can put all that together. It's working with the budget. It's working with the city budget and the county budget, and working within the subsidies that we need as well. And it is a lot harder with the county because the county subsidizes us through their general fund versus the city is able to support us with the 150 development fund, the RET fund. So, but I'll tell you, we've talked about this a long time, and I agree it's something that we really need to now, because we keep getting more and more units into our inventory, and we need to start to really take care of them. That's one of the reasons why we started having an educational program with regards to our HOAs. And that's something that with COVID we stopped doing, but we need to bring it back. But, and I know we get calls all the time from HOAs saying, well, we want to do a roof, is there somebody else out there? And that's the type of person that we kind of need in the office too, is that this person needs, these 3 HOAs need a roof for the next 2 years. Let's see economies of scale of what we can do.
Just to sort of.
Can I have Matthew answer too?
Oh yeah, of course.
I agree.
Do you think you have the time to be looking at that?
I mean, I don't know time, but it's, a long-term strategy is a good idea, which we should start thinking about, yeah.
Sorry.
No, yeah, I appreciate us bringing this, to try and bring it together a little bit. I mean, one, on this specific point, I completely agree. All of City Council completely agrees. We've talked about for 2 years now, wanting and being willing to put money into such a solution, having an in-house maintenance team. like I hear this all the time in my other work outside of here. It's like, well, I'm too busy to be working on the broader picture. And it's like, well, that's exactly when you need to work on the broader picture. Because if you don't, you'll continue to spin your wheels and be in the exact same place you were, and you don't solve any of those things. This is actually a good moment for that work, because it will take extra funding, or it will take the reallocation of funding away from some other priority that's also really important. We're going forward with an SDR tax. That's additional money for housing. It's got infrastructure in it. We've got at least verbal commitment from the county that they're going to look at a new tax around affordable housing next year, next cycle. So, it would be very helpful,
Right.
frankly, for them to be able to say, hey, here's a big chunk of what this is going for. And it's going to work for you. So, I while we have a lot of things to do, I think it's to our benefit to, at the same time, look at that broader picture. And I was gonna, just to tie it into the comment I was gonna wait to make, but I think it relates to this in the community engagement part. I would add just one part to that, which is demonstrate our understanding of the systemic challenges, because I have conversations all the time. People are like, don't you know that we have this this imbalance in maintenance, or don't you know about HOA, or don't you know about the generational change and legacy issues? And I'm like, yeah, we do. We're working on this, and this. But I think when we communicate to people in the specific about the fix, it doesn't always translate. And so if we can really think about coming at the conversation around public engagement of like, we get it. We haven't solved these things yet, but we are aware that there are these structural long-term deficits, and we're working on them. Then it gives us the opportunity to do all those things and build trust, but it also gives us the opportunity to engage from a place of service with the community about how we do solve these things structurally and bring them into the conversation.
Well, and I think, just right with a lot of the economic uncertainty out there, I've always said that if to me, I think that we missed an opportunity in 2008-9 when there was a slowdown in the construction industry to really keep a lot of that the construction community, right? It's like they're not competing to go build the house on Red Mountain then, right? And so if I think, to Kelly's point, if we can understand what it looks like fully funded, there's potentially some funds coming up, there's some uncertainty about what's going to happen in the next 2, 3, 5 years. I think now is the time to kind of start that conversation so that if that situation comes to bear, you've got the plan, you've got the money, and you can really make a meaningful progress on some of the issues.
Yeah.
And I think,
Great point.
and honestly, I think that is kind of, even though we haven't talked about this specifically, but I think this has to do with the housing stock sustainability and investigating capital repairs programs and stuff. And this is something that I think it's something that we can start to do in 2020. What is it? 2023? Yeah.
Next
I
one.
have no idea.
Good discussion.
Great,
Yeah,
thanks.
Thank you. Okay. We will, and Kelly, my Zoom is dropped off, so if you,
I saw her
Okay.
hand pop up there.
All right, I'll just give you a shout.
perfect. All right, we will move on to the continued discussion on AMI.
So just on the last one, I know there's no formal vote, but we just sort of, that's basically the board saying like, yes, go forward.
Great,
Okay.
thanks.
Hopefully Bethany's online.
Get Cindy, and
I'm here.
Bethany
Yay.
is here and was smart to not sit in traffic and try and drive into town.
Oh, she
Yeah.
said
Oh,
that-
she was stuck in traffic trying, she just got home after an hour in
Get out of town.
traffic.
I'm here after an hour, yes. I'm going to try to give a quick overview because it's been a little while since we talked about this. As I stated in the memo, Maddie, if you can just go up to the, thank you, page 29. So we started talking about this in July 20th meeting, and what staff had proposed was a 10% adjustment to the income and asset categories across the board. So that would apply for both rental and ownership. It would adjust all of our categories up by 10%. And the board asked us to bring back some different options. And so what we are here today is with some different options. So just a quick refresher, AMI is the midpoint of a region's income distribution, meaning half makes more and half makes less. It's set by HUD, and it's published annually, and the same methodology is used across the country to arrive at the numbers for Pitkin County. It uses the US Census and the American Community Survey to figure that out for, and it's all tied to household size. So what APCHA has done, we haven't been using AMI actually for that long, but what we do is we configure it for different categories based upon 100% for a 4-person household, and then we build our chart out. We've been doing this since, I think, 2016, Cindy.
I think so.
Can confirm. And we adjust it annually based upon what HUD produces. What we've found for the past 2 years is that the numbers from HUD have actually gone down. But what we're seeing on the ground is that's not the case. People are getting increases, salaries are going up, and they're both from a rental perspective and ownership, they're creeping up in category based upon those salary increases, which is great. So as Maddie scrolls down to the next page, what the first chart is looking at what our max incomes are currently, and then a proposed switch. So we did not switch flat 10% across the board in this updated one. If you look down at category 1, we've adjusted it by 5%. If you look at the proposed versus current, so category 1 currently is at 50% AMI, and what we're proposing is 55% AMI. The rationale behind that, I think it might have been Skippy, but July was a little while ago, was the idea that some of the categories seemed like bigger jumps than others. Maybe category 5, 240% of AMI jumping to 250% of AMI might not seem as big, but as a 50% jump from AMI to 60% jump in AMI. So we adjusted both category 1 and category 2 by 5% increases, and then 3, 4, and 5 by a 10% increase.
But Bethany, what are the rows, since they don't have headers?
Household
I
size.
apologize. So
Household
that's
size.
household size.
Okay.
1 through 6,
So-
then? Up to 6-person household size? Okay.
Yeah.
2,
Got it.
3, 4, 5. Family of 4, right?
Got it.
No, 6, right?
That makes sense.
6.
That's 6 on
Right.
4 kids,
4 kids.
Yeah.
or
in the
maybe.
traditional sense. Who knows?
That's why I said that maybe.
And then I apologize, question 3, who would this affect that is currently in the system got taken out, because we looked at it prior, and it would reduce the number that was affected in this one. And if this is the way we choose to go or choose to look at further, we can bring back all those numbers with updated data from Home Track. And then, so, from a rental perspective, what we talked about before is in June, I think it might have been May, we brought to the board the idea that, hey, we are seeing more and more renters, they can't requalify. They have jumped more than the 120% requal rate. So the board adjusted that up to 150% from a requal. If we were to change the AMI categories by a 5 or a 10% jump, what we're recommending is to bring that back down to the 120% requal numbers. But again, that, we can talk about, I did hear some concern. We could also stagger that in. So that is good for basically the next year, let's say. So until May or June of next year. However, when we did approve it, we did say that it might change from year to year. So we can work through that. Maddie, if you jump down a little bit, The next option is brand new to the board. We did some investigating. Cindy, Andrew and I went up to Snowmass and talked to Snowmass about how they set their income and assets for home purchasing. They don't use AMI. They felt that it was a bad representation of Pitkin County, and it wasn't accurately reflecting what was going on the ground. Years ago, it was the previous housing director, so I don't know the exact year. They ended up sitting down with a local banker, and I don't know from what bank, to come up with this chart that would say, okay, this amount of income and this amount of assets can afford this priced home. And so what they've done is they've just updated that annually by about 3% every year. They also require a pre-approval letter by a bank in the qualification application, which APCHA does not currently do. So APCHA is actually relatively supportive of moving in this direction from a staff perspective. We think it makes a lot of sense. It certainly ties income and assets a little bit more in. There's certainly a lot of logistics that go into this if the board is interested in exploring this further, in that we sort of have to sit categories within kind of these broader things to make sure we're being reflective of all the deed restrictions and old approvals that have come through the city and the county. And we'd also be supportive of sitting down with a banker and starting a chart all by ourselves. Certainly not just using Snowmasses. So Maddie, if you scroll down a little bit, I'm sorry this is small on screens, but hopefully you can see this. Basically, this is what Snowmass currently uses. This is a copy from them. And they say that, okay, if a home is valued at $100,000, your max income should be $103,937, and your net worth should be $88,669. I'm obviously not a banker, and we would want to sit down and redo this, but their chart goes up with home prices in $10,000 increments up to $790, for example. Ours would certainly have to look a little bit different. Some of our homes go up higher, but we thought it was a very interesting idea and one that staff very much wanted to present to the board and see how you all felt about this. I am happy, to, I'll talk about one other thing. This chart would not apply to the rental side of APCHA. There's no correlation for me to use this chart for anything other than ownership applications. So the rental side of things at this time would still have categories, and we'd still be working on AMI at this point. I think the goal for staff today is to hear if the board is interested in either of these, or I'll be sad if it's neither of these, but we can do some more investigating and find out some more things. But we would like some direction on where to go. We think it's something that really needs to be looked at. We would agree that AMI doesn't seem to be reflective of what we're seeing on the ground right now, and so we're trying to put that into play on a daily basis, yet folks are getting increases. So I am happy to answer any questions. Cindy was also in the meeting with Snowmass, so she can answer some questions in the room. But we would really love direction from the board as to kind of what we might be able to bring back to you as basically final and looking for approval. This would have to go through a first and second reading because it lives in our regulations. So we are very far from an approval perspective where it would take place, but we're looking for direction from you all.
I have a chart clarification again.
All right, Allison.
I'll jump in.
Okay, can I just, for this chart, Bethany, is this regardless of household size, or how in our charts we have a household size limits? Where does that play into this model?
It doesn't.
So this does not take into account household size, and that is something that we can take in. The reason our chart takes into household size is the idea that kids are expensive, and so it takes, as your household size gets larger, in a sense, you're allowed to make more money and still fall into that category because it's more expensive.
I think that's very logical.
Billy.
Okay. Let's see, a couple things I'm working through here. One being my,
Does she have her video
I think my understanding is that if we compare this currently, people in the category regime, the AMI thing, can have higher equivalent net worth than this might allow, is what we're looking at. Is that a fair conclusion to draw?
I think we would have to sit down, and if John was willing, maybe it would be John, and really restart this chart from scratch and say, in today's world, what is, the home price versus what should they be making in income versus what should they have in net worth to afford that. I think we could also take into account HOA dues in some way, as we're seeing those creep up. So I think the idea from this chart is more, it's a different way of looking at the system, and it's one that we could try to recreate in a sense.
And then my second observation is that this would avoid, I don't know if it's a problem, but the circumstance that we run into with category applicants that are buying a house that's much less than what they could afford, right? So this sort of stabilized that a bit, but then I'm thinking about like a unit over at Midland Park Place, that'll sell for $170,000 because it's old and maybe never sold previously. But then that would also limit the number of people who could apply for that unit, right? Because if the value is 170 grand for a category 3 unit, it's going to have a much smaller number of people that would qualify to own it. And so, that would address kind of that scenario we've discussed. But I also would like to understand, what does that do for the cost of home ownership over time that we've also raised concerns about? So there's, without some conversation about recalibrating a little bit, or we need to determine if there needs to be an associated program to recalibrate values, to avoid either of those unintended consequences, I think. So I'm not sold yet. I think there's a lot to talk about here and work through. I still am I just always come back to what would an affordability index look like? What, if we're going to take into account people's income and assets and expenses of living here, does childcare matter? Does health insurance costs matter? Those sort of things about how much house a person could afford. I'm not sure we've had that conversation about how relevant, the broader cost of living is when we determine what someone can afford in a house. So I just want to throw all of those concerns. Thanks.
And I think this in some ways is somewhat of an affordability standard, in the sense that you're basically saying a person should only spend this much on their mortgage. And I think this would alleviate some of those problems where we have that category 4 that sells for super low, or vice versa, because it kind of removes that category and it just says then, these are the folks that could afford this house, they would just make this. So.
Well, I think there's certainly a fairness thing on this too, right? Where you're not getting the bid ups
Bid downs.
or bid.
Either
No,
way.
you're bidding up.
Bidding
You're getting
up.
twos
You
bidding
can't
on
bid down.
fours.
Oh, in our case, yeah.
Right?
correct, yeah.
I'm just trying to figure out the logic behind this because
Yeah.
it's about half of what I think the national standard is for mortgage, front end ratios on your mortgages.
Right.
Even when
And
you
I think,
include-
John, the thing to think about is this was probably done 15 to 20 years, and Snowmass said maybe it's time to sit down with a banker again and maybe relook at it. But
But
they've
those
just been
standards haven't
adjusting it.
changed, so I'm trying to understand.
Yeah.
It's
Well, I mean, I think the challenge with, I think the challenge with this is, like you talked about, it doesn't take into account the number of people and the property. I mean, you'd almost have to do this annually. I mean, we're sitting here with another 75 basis point increase expected later this month, right? I mean, interest rates have doubled in the last 6 months on mortgages. I think there's a lot that goes into that. And then one question that I had for Skippy, and maybe should have asked when Ben was here, but I mean, effectively this would blow up the categories on sales. I mean, and land use planning includes all of the categories within it, and right, I mean, there's a lot that if we were to make this change, I mean, this would be
I have a lot of questions for that reason.
extensive change, right?
Yeah, I have a lot of questions right now.
Take it away.
Sure. So, Bethany, first, let me just say, I understand that we're not talking about adopting this. So my questions are really to understand the structure of the system, the benefits it conveys, the potential deficits or downsides it has, and I really don't understand it. And like Carson said, it's all of that. So first, just help me understand how this functions. What I understand, correct me if I'm wrong, is that there is a sliding scale of home price relative to income, and so it creates more fairness or parity across the spectrum of potential incomes, which seems to be an obvious benefit. Before I take the obvious for granted, is that correct?
Correct. So,
Okay.
for example, if a home was going for sale for $400,000 on this chart, you couldn't make more than $232,000
Okay.
as your family.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I understand the primary benefit, and that seems great, but I don't understand how this works in practice. So is it the case that when any affordable housing unit in Snowmass goes up, every single employee can bid on it, and then the price is set based on the income of the winner?
No.
Or if not, how are the prices set? How do they determine what product is out there? I don't understand any of that.
Bid.
So, Skippy, the max sales prices are determined just like APCHA does. So there's the same appreciation calculator. So a house goes online for, let's say, $200,000, and it appreciates at 3% or CPI until that person decides to sell. At sale, if that home is being sold for $405,000, then anyone that makes less than, $232,217 is allowed to bid for that house, assuming they have the requisite occupancy and work in Snowmass.
And the pre what's it called from the bank. So that eliminates your very, very poor people in that case from bidding and out, being above their cost of living, because the bank has already said, yes, I will give them this loan, or no. If you're making $50,000 a year, you probably aren't going to come with your packet with that pre-approval.
Okay, so in that circumstance, if no new units are ever being developed, and if a category equivalent is just one line here, this system guarantees category creep, so to speak, always. And I know our units go up in value as well, but because the bucket is bigger, more people can bid on it. And so the system sort of does rely on the regular creation of new, specifically low-priced units, so that over time you have a dispersion of different unit types. Is that correct?
So
that make any
Snowmass
sense?
doesn't have categories, so
Yeah.
we have to think of it, separate from how.
Give me
APCHA
other
works.
language if you have it to use.
let's-
I don't know how else to talk about
And
it.
let's look at the top of the spectrum, $790,000, right? The top end income earners, 368, so they're making 30,000, almost 31,000 a month, right? The payment on a 5% mortgage with taxes and insurance and HOA dues is $5,140 a month. If you go in and you use top end ratios, front end ratios, 31%, you could drop all the way down to $205,000 a year to buy that unit. right? So that's the spectrum of buyer, from 205 to the top end of the income category at 368,000.
Right.
In a bank, you got to get a pre-approval, pre-qual, right?
Yeah.
That's Snowmass, so you've got to do a little work there. But that's the spectrum of buyer. I don't know if that's creep as much as,
I think what he's saying is, he's saying that because because you have constant appreciation of the
They're on the escalator.
of the
right?
values,
Start everyone at 100,000 and go.
then the max income is consistently going up, and unless
Gotta
you're
keep
adding,
moving.
unless you keep feeding the bottom end, you lose that bottom end. Is that?
Yeah, it all moves up and to the right on the
Right.
chart, and so this is like
Yeah.
this having availability over time to differing jobs is predicated on the
Yeah.
regular production of the most subsidized units as I'm looking at it.
I mean,
May or may not be a bad thing. I'm just like that's I'm trying to understand if that's
This is a
true.
very logical and valid way of looking at income. I think personally where we are and the
Age of the program?
and the age of the program, I think to try and make this change now, personally, I think we've got so many.
changes everything.
It changes
Yeah.
everything. Land use code has to be rewritten. I mean, I think it's a good idea. I just think from a time standpoint, I don't know that this is something we want to tackle personally. I'm curious hearing if anybody has a differing opinion.
I still have so much more to understand to even understand if the value is worth chasing.
Well, I think it goes to coaching though as much as anything else,
Right.
right? And think about interest rates and how they would impact. I use 5. It's 3.5. All of a sudden, that drops that purchase power. That raises the purchasing power of the lowest, right?
Right.
That does. I mean, there's market cycles.
And then like I said, I mean you've got interest. I mean, interest rates go into this. You've got HOA dues, $500 a month. I mean, I can tell you, there's a lot of places that wish they had $500 a month.
Yeah.
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 Right. So I don't know. That's where I am.
I guess if 3 people speak up fast enough that we don't have to ask all the questions on this one, that might be helpful. So not to step on your toes too much, Skippy, but I wonder if there's ways where we can use our category system and even the reliance on AMI to achieve something that looks more like that boots on the ground that you're describing. Like this is imaginary. Category 1 could start at 100% AMI, and then move up. Like we have dibs on what those categories are, and if we need them to match our workforce, we should have census data. We should have cost of living data from annually. Where that I think we could use the system we have, not reimagine all of it, but reflect the current boots on the ground thing. The other thing that I think is easier with 5 categories instead of 110 is recessions. We go through all this, we make a whole new system. People figure out where they play, and then everyone's salary goes down again, right? And then, I think the biggest thing we're trying to help right now was kind of the long overdue inflation of salaries, essentially. I don't know that we won't be stagnant for the next 10 years, and that levels out.
Well, I mean, that's interesting math too, because I gotta find my scribbles. If you look at our math, let's choose category 2, 2-person household, 79,970 is what we're proposing changing that to. I know I have the math somewhere.
69037? Oh, yeah, you're right. 78,907.
But at 100, well, let's go to 100, first one, 150% of the 150 is $120,000. 150%, so it's 112,000.
112.
Okay, so 120% of 78,907
94.
is 94. That's a significant, to me, a
Right.
difference, right? So do you lose that? I mean, we made the adjustment, let people at 150% of current AMI on a category 2. Now we're going to raise the AMI level, but we're going to pull back that 30%. Do you end up kicking that person out the next year? right?
Right.
And you might.
Yeah.
Well, and I think, I mean, if you move to the, I mean, to that, to the change in the categories, this option one, there's, to me, I think there's a huge disparity between the category ones and the category fives. I mean, for example, the category five 4-person household goes from 265.2 as your max under the 150%, it goes to 397. Right, so I mean, you're talking about 100 and,
265.2 to
well, so if you
291.7?
take, so what I'm saying is that, what I'm saying, well, what I'm saying.
This is all rental though, right?
This is all the rental.
No,
It's
Well, this
everything
is,
right now.
yeah.
this would be,
Well, but,
For
I mean,
both.
the real worry is rentals,
yeah.
right? That you're kicking people out because they made too much money the previous year.
So, just for clarity, so option one, option two, let's start there.
Yeah, no.
So, where is everybody at on option one, option two?
I don't know yet. I don't know yet. I still don't really understand option 2.
Well, I don't think we make any page 31 changes.
That's option 2.
And then that's option 2, right?
Right,
Yeah,
that's option two.
So you're option 1, you're option 1. I'm option 1 unless someone can make a case for
Okay.
why I should understand and why it's significantly better to move to
Right.
option 2. I'm open to that. I just don't understand
Yeah.
it well enough
Yeah.
yet to say that.
Okay, and then, so I think what John was talking about, what I was talking about is, we've talked about making 150%, right? 3 months ago, whatever it was, we made a 150% increase to rental income.
Oh, I see what you're saying.
Right, and then this would then reset to 120%, right?
Of
So
a-
what
of
does the,
110%.
right, so we told people 3 months ago, you've got 150%, now we're saying we've raised the category, and now it's 120% of the new category, and what's the delta between those two?
Well, and by spring, a new AMI though also.
Correct.
So it might, if they get them, if HUD's a
Well,
lower.
but I
active
mean,
this
my
year.
scenario, that person that was a category 2, or would have been, would be a category 2, now they're a low, middle category 3, right? And they got to be out of their rental housing because it's a category 2.
120% of 110%,
Mhm.
right? You're adding another
Exactly.
22%. So it's
105%.
132 versus 150 at the end of the
Right.
day.
They
So,
have a year to rectify that and find the next, yeah.
well, I guess for me personally, if I was living in a rental place and you told me I have 150% of the income to requalify, and then you come back 3 months later and you say, just kidding, it's 120% of the new number, and that number is lower than the number you previously told me, that doesn't feel very fair, right? It's like things are shifting so
Yeah.
quickly. So to me, I think the way that, if to be sort of consistent and fair, I would say, we move forward through the end of at least, this year, and say, we're gonna stick with the previous number for this year. Next year, here's the new category, it's 120% of that, personally, and I think that if we were going to make an exception to that, it would be in some of the higher categories, particularly the category 4 and 5, so the example that I was giving was, if you take a category 4, 4-person household, max income 226,550, at
I'm
150%.
just looking at the wrong one. I have 290.
He's on the top.
I'm on the top.
Oh, thanks.
I'm on the top
Thank
of the
you.
old.
Okay.
So if you look at the current 2022 max income, category 4-person household, 226,550. 150% of that is $339,000, right? So you've got $113,000 difference, whereas it's in category 2, it's 40,000.
Do we have Cat 5 rentals?
No, not at this point in time,
But
we
this
don't.
is ownership as well, right?
Yes,
ownership
but
as well.
but what we're most worried about is
The
that
rental.
surprise kick out that doesn't happen when you're in ownership. You can win the lottery,
Yeah, but the 150% that we did was only for rentals. It was not for ownership.
Correct.
Right.
So we're applying to a new class.
Right, but we don't need to do the math on Cat 5 because it doesn't exist.
Okay.
Rentals.
Correct.
At least not right now.
Right, not available, but there are some, right? And there's also some RO
No.
rentals. There's none at all? Okay.
There's ownership. There's Category 5 ownership units. We don't
So-
have any
And there's
Category
RO
5,
rental and
but
ownership.
we do have RO rentals.
Yeah.
Bethany, Matthew, Cindy, so what are you looking for from us today to proceed with the proposed, kind of the discussion we've been having? And what specifically, I mean, I see you've got some questions here with, who would this affect in the system? How would this apply
It
to
would-
requalifications?
Yeah. It would be really nice, Carson. So I think we know that option 1, which is adjust AMIs, operate under current system, is great. That way we know, okay, we're going forward. The other thing that would be really helpful is, are these the right jumps? This 10% and then reducing to the 5%, which was what was asked for in the previous meeting. And the reason I say that is because this has to go to our first reading. So if we're close, we can bring it back for a first reading, for example. If this is the chart that we feel comfortable with, and we can throw the language in the regs that says the 150 is good until even May of 2023 when we get the updated AMI numbers.
Bethany, do we have other data we can pull into this that is not HUD? I guess research of what the salaries are. I'm pretty sure, and I'd have to run to my other professional life and dig through emails, but that we have brand new cost of living data in Pitkin County, like median salary of residents in Pitkin County. We might even be able to break that into sector, what people are earning. I think because we're trying to react to boots on the ground and don't appreciate the HUD number, that's the kind of thing that would be very helpful is a real range. Is anyone any 2-person household, what life is it here where there's a 2-person household who's making $46,000? You know, like, does that exist? Because if not, why is it on the chart? I think that would some better data, and I'm happy to help send that along. I was just in touch with Colorado Workforce in Pitkin County about that. Then I don't know what that proposal is, right? Because then if it's not AMI, it's like some other made up calculation that's more real to us. We have to get that in the regulation, and then decide that that's an annual cost of living increase that we just say goes from now on, or that we revert back in times of peril. You know, I understand that is option 1A for Allison. Like, not exactly direction, but I do think that, like, the numbers that end up on this chart should be real life experiences here, and I forget my other point.
And I think, Allison, the reason APCHA went to AMI, and it was done before my time, so I've been reading through some docs, was that it was consistent and that it was done annually, and it was easy for us. We weren't pulling through kind of data that came in from multiple sources and trying to determine what these numbers should be. I'm not saying that that's the right way to go, but under current, that's what we've been doing, and it's easy to make the changes and to put it into play.
It was also using something that was consistent with other housing authorities.
Yeah, that's nice.
Versus, and where we felt that we could also, we had a better transparency out there that this is what we're using, an actual valid numbers from the state or from the federal government. Now and then you're right, in a way, is that really true? Is that really correct? But that's one of the reasons why we also went to AMI, is because of that, so that we could be more transparent. So we had an actual true source. This is where we're getting it from.
These are
Instead of just
state
us just
averages,
throwing it
right?
out. No.
It's supposed to be county, but it's so.
Is
Yeah,
it
it's Pitkin
specific to
County.
county?
Is that how many people are unemployed? Like, is it? I think it'd be interesting for some of our data experts on the staff to, like, are we always a certain amount off of AMI? Like, when we look at our own county data, are we consistently, like, the average workforce is really making 10% more than HUD always says? And has it been that way for the last 7 years? Because in which case we can be like, okay, you say AMI is this, but, like, APCHA is always going to be AMI plus 10, and then 50% of that, 90% of that, blah, blah, blah.
I think this is a rule of unintended consequences, where you've made a change, and then you want to go to something more normalized, and it's not quite the impact you wanted it to have.
Can Bethany, I just like to ask before I was surprised to see staff embracing Snowmass's model, and not because I think it's bad and you guys are misled, just like it's a really big change. I have to imagine this would require significant lift on your end, and so can you explain that to me? Can you make the case of why staff feels like this is the right direction? Like, give me the full confidence case for why this is awesome and we should embrace it.
So I think it puts into play an affordability standard a little bit. And sitting down with a banker, and it looks at, kind of what income and assets should be to purchase a certain priced home. And then it looks at, we were hopeful that we could play into it HOA dues, like establishing, okay, it's HOAs that are about $500 a month, so factoring that into the cost of home ownership. We also thought it leveled out some of the pricing that's a little odd through some of our categories. I know we hear sometimes we have a few category 4 units, I think at Hunter Creek, that are priced lower than generally category 4s are. So we thought it was kind of an interesting play that way. We loved the pre-qualification process. That's something that we could require just in general anyway without adopting that chart. But we really liked that it made sure people could actually afford what they were walking into, and had some safeguards attached to that. It's a huge lift, but we thought it was kind of interesting and exciting and a little bit different. AMI's a little bit of a struggle for us sometimes, just because it's gone down the past 2 years. Now we'll see what happens next year. We were convinced it was going to go up this year, but maybe next year will be the year it will go up. So that's why, Cindy, I don't know if you want to add anything else.
I think I would jump in and just, the other thing that it does is because it goes in such small it goes in $10,000 increments. The other thing that it sort of helps to eliminate is, right, if you look at, the category 4, there's a huge disparity between, if it's a 4 people family of 4, the jump from category 3, if you're say you're making $145,000, the max is $226,000, right? It's a very different financial picture between somebody making $145,000 and somebody making $226,000. And what the Snowmass model does is it sort of eliminates that wide category gap because it goes into. Like I said,
But it doesn't change what that person can buy.
No, but I think I think it's a very, like I said, it's a rational, it's a logical, it's a well thought out way of doing things. I think it just represents a substantial change from where we are today.
And I would agree it would.
Yeah, no question about that. It would be a huge change.
It's fun to
just something
discuss
we
other
wanted
options too.
Yeah.
That's great.
Well, in the essence of moving things forward, I don't think we're going to tackle that tonight.
No.
Can I
Right.
throw in a question? So I think one thing that's nice about the Snowmass chart is that the price of the house is part of the math, whereas with our category system, it's regardless of the price of the house. What category you're put in is 100% your salary. So like you said, Bethany, we have such a weird system of Cat 4s that are priced under Cat 3s, and you're allowed to make more money and pay less for a house. Is there a way to discuss, maybe on that kind of affordability analysis issue, some price ranges of houses for sale within the categories we've already established, as opposed to just like putting houses in categories as well as people, more like Snowmass does?
I think
That's changing deed restrictions.
I think changing
and
deed
development.
restrictions is, I think that is a tall order.
Yeah. because you're changing deed, you're also changing the approvals. If a project was approved in a certain category and now you want to change that category because they're less, it's
Right.
something that's pretty, that to me is really, really pretty major
Okay.
to do.
I mean, no one
That's where the
would be
affordability comes
upset
from. I'm not
if
worried about the
they
rich guy that-
all of a sudden had to sell their
person
house for
making $30,000 a
more.
month.
They had to.
Of course not.
Right? They
So
had to.
why would we allow somebody to make a windfall on
Well,
that? That does, to me,
that
doesn't
happens
make
here.
sense.
I guess, it would take an analysis of like, do we have the right amount of
get people
homes in
with
each
stretch,
category
stretch.
to reflect the percentage of workers that are also in
That's something that we need,
salary?
that to me is a whole different thing that we need to talk about. And it's something that the city, when they're doing the lumberyard, needs to really say, where do we really need the pricing of the home? I don't think has anything to do with this aspect of it. It's our, and one of the things is that we did want to look at one point in time is if we ever did come up with an affordability standard, where, and we're looking at the AMI numbers, where do the categories make sense? Do the rental rates make sense? Do the sales prices make sense? But right now, we have we increase those by, the rental rates are different. They're, actually, the rental rates are, our rental rates for most of our units are increased by 3% or CPI, whichever is less. The same with sales prices, and because they're based on what's in our regulations at right now. HUD's different. The T2 and ACI are different. That comes out with when we get the document for what the AMI numbers are. We get rental incomes for that as well. For just for the tax credit properties. But for our sales prices and our rental rates, they're increased by 3% or CPI, whichever is less, on a yearly basis.
We do that to salaries instead of going up by AMI?
We don't, at one point in time, we did.
Okay.
Then we decided that we wanted to be consistent with all the other housing authorities out there. That's why we went to AMI, because that is how we used to do it.
That's interesting.
Whatever that increase was from November to November, as long as it was less than 3%, it was that CPI number or the 3%.
Okay, that's
I
really
think,
interesting.
I just had an argument with Carson here, but I don't think Snowmass brings in, there's no affordability standard in this number today. Right?
mean,
This
it's
is only a
386.
maximum income standard that you can make
The
to
last
buy a
20
unit.
rows are all the same
So
salary.
then it becomes the bank saying, here's what you can afford.
Right.
But we already have that in the one we're at today, right? Bank makes a loan decision on what somebody can buy, whether they're jumping up 2 categories or 3 categories or not. But, ultimately, how we impact this is more and more education, more and more discussion about what it takes to own a house, what it takes to
Right.
own a condo, being responsible homeowners and taking care of your roof, being a responsible HOA members, and then also, making everybody realize that, hey, it's a heck of a privilege to live in APCHA housing, and make sure you turn it over to the next guy in good shape,
In good shape.
and not be, kind of the derelict, selfish person that just wants to turn over and I've used the term before, so I won't use it, but a real problem unit
Yeah.
to somebody else that will pay for it.
One of the things that might be helpful in trying to look at this is if we did have some real life examples about what sort of debt to income ratios we're seeing with the existing categories, right? Which we could anonymize that data and just have,
I mean, you guys are collecting financial.
sales price,
We
right?
get that
Sales
stuff.
price, income, and then you could use this proxy for interest rates, and you're gonna know what the HOA fees were on the property, right? And then we could sort of understand, most of the category ones are at, 20% debt to income, most of, right? You could sort of understand that, and then I think you could use that data along with the income that you're talking about, and sort of, and I'm happy to help with this, right? It's just not to put it all on staff, but Right, you could, I mean, an Excel spreadsheet, you could put that together pretty quickly
Quickly.
where you just put the numbers in and it'd give you all the data.
We had a good chart of who was cost burdened. Remember that, the yellow
That was in
Excels?
our,
Was
that
just
study that we
rentals?
did.
So,
But I don't know what it took into consideration.
Okay.
so we,
I have to look.
trying to wrap this up here in, in the next 5 or so minutes. How are we feeling? Do we want to try and get some more data? Do we want to move forward? Where?
I think we leave it the same.
Okay.
And I think we've,
What a twist!
and I think we've already let the cat out of the bag at 150% of your income to qualify for rentals. If somebody's moving up in buyer category because their income went up, good for you.
I have one response to that because I took the time to do my research today. On Zillow right now, in Pitkin County, there are 5 2-bedroom homes available, period. The cheapest one is $1.7 million. It's an old snowmass. The first one the top 3 are all in Aspen. The cheapest one of those is like $3.8 million.
Yeah.
So I think what we found was hard in the sales. I like the rental fix we made. I agree with you. I think what's hard in the sales right now is that when a couple both got promoted to, I don't know, 107 a year each or something, so now they're making 213. Oh no, sorry, it's bottom chart even. No, I guess our chart. You can't buy a $1.7 million house at $213,000 a year as a
Yeah,
couple.
but I think the free market has already left the
Well, then
regular
that person
worker
has to
behind.
leave the
I
valley.
mean, it's left me
They don't
behind.
get to live in Cat
Right now, I make
5.
a lot
They
of
don't
money
get a
for
they don't
the
get a bid on
income.
any Cat 5s. RO is 1.7. Free market's 1.7. You're losing that upper level family, which is not what I thought I was going to come to APCHA and be like poor rich people, right? But like because of that, we're losing that, I think, middle management who was not allowed to live in our system, and they have no access to the free market, and it's just such a stark, absolutely absurd free market economy that we have here that there's literally we will lose
But
people.
that's not even on this chart.
And is that up
That's
to,
the
is that
RO
up to us to try to fill that gap? Because that is one of the reasons why we went to category 5, 6, and 7,
Right.
because there
And
was
that
such
speaks to
a
you need
huge
more
gap
RO.
between category 4 and RO.
And RO needs to be under $1 million.
Yeah.
Because we're not letting them earn enough to buy the next category up. We're not, and so, yeah, I think that is on us, right? Is to have the workforce housed, like 60% of the workforce housed, and if 60% of our workforce is in Cat 5, or sorry, if 30% of that, 60% is in Cat 5, then we just lost those people.
Well, I mean, I think your point is a salient one and a good one. And I agree. And I think we've talked about for years the missing middle, and that's grown substantially. I think that's the conversation we're having with Ben, right? Is about the production of more RO units. And historically, there's been sort of this allergy to RO because it's been my observation, no one's words, but it's been, observed as like, oh, those rich people aren't our problem. But guess what? Those rich people are not rich people per the market, and they do have a significant portion and importance in our community. And so, yeah, it is our job to fill in what's missing. It's just that what's missing has expanded dramatically. Mm-hmm. And we have other tools to bring to bear to empower, in my mind, the private sector to deliver those things so that the government can focus on lower category stuff.
Previous years, that RO that was absorbed by the down valley, right? And that's getting to a point. where that's-
Not anymore, or
So-
less so. Sure.
I guess I'm just, if we don't have many couples making 46.4, and we have a lot of workforce couples making, like 23.5. Sorry, I'm just looking at the second line throughout our proposed cats. I think there's numbers to play with, Bethany, where we just bump all those percentages up to reflect reality a little bit.
Okay.
I think if we're going to do that, there needs to be some rationale behind it. So let's, I mean, what if we did do something like that where we did get sort of an idea of, sales for the last year. And that shouldn't take much time we could go through the listings and quickly, roughly gross income, sales price, HOA dues. And then from there, we can put together some loose numbers and say most of the category twos were, looked like this. I mean, and like I said,
Well, this is gonna, so yell at me if you want to now. But you guys qualify everybody that comes in the door at category, right? Mm-hmm. And here's what you can bid. I mean, I'd love to see some stratification of, here's our categories, here's how many are in each one that qualifies, right? They're not all buying units, but they're bidding on units.
right.
And also, I'd love to see the top end of that category. Like, are we hitting 307,000 on a Category 5 unit? That's 25 grand a month,
That's crazy.
right?
Oh, well, that's,
We
6
can
people.
get that data, John.
Yeah.
I mean, that'd give you a
That's
little
exciting.
more, that'd be a little more information
Yeah,
to make a
let's-
decision off of.
let's do that. So, Bethany, Cindy, Matthew, who should like I said, I'm happy to help connect and,
Yeah, just drop us a
Yeah,
line
let
for
me
that.
talk to
Yeah.
Andrew tomorrow, Matthew, just
Yeah.
not to jump over your toes, but let me talk to Andrew.
Jump in
I
a
love
little
Excel
bit to
spreadsheets.
caution. Sorry, can you guys hear me?
Yeah.
I would just jump in a little bit to caution that, that data will only reveal active participants, right? So it's not necessarily, like, yeah, there could be some people who are coming in just to qualify, but more likely it's responding to what's available. So it's not necessarily going to show us, distributions for category units that have not been available or family household, compositions that have not bid on anything.
Yeah, well, that was and I could be wrong on that, but I always thought there was a subset of people, fairly sizable, that wanted to keep their file
There
current, so that when something came up, they were ready
They're
to bid.
ready.
Is that, I mean, is there a
We
subset
still
of
have
that?
we still have a few people who do that, definitely. You say, here are my taxes, I want to make sure you put these in my system for you. So there are people who do that.
Okay. So, I mean, there probably isn't as many as I thought there would be, but.
That's
And
really
the thing
exciting.
of it is you have to also realize that with Category 5, because we don't have a ton of Category 5 ownership units. We have a ton of Category 4.
Okay.
So there's a lot I think that we can get some good statistics with regards to Category, and not even 1 anymore, because we have very few Category 1 ownership units, but 2, 3, and 4. It's Category 5 that you're not going to see a lot of, except for when people come through and they're trying to bid on RO. Then we can see what anything over Category 4, we can see where they sit. And so we can still get some of that information, because we still have some ROs that come up, and everybody still has to qualify if they're going to buy an RO.
I think any of that data would be so helpful. I love that idea.
'cause, I mean, it may be Category 1 needs to move 15%,
That-
Category 2 needs to move 7%, right? I mean, and then there's some rationale behind it, and it's not just 10% across. I mean,
Right.
I personally, I do think that the numbers are, I think they need to be increased, particularly as you said in the 1 and 2 person categories. But I think if we have some rationale behind it, I think it would be helpful. And like I said, I'm happy to help on that. So
And I think you're talking about mathematical rationale, which I appreciate. I guess the philosophical rationale is like our duty to put heads in beds, and if no one qualifies for Cat 1 anymore, if that's basically a mythical category, let's up those numbers and make every category someone can get their head into a bed.
I don't think we have that problem right now, do we?
We
Cindy?
don't
Well,
have
we
that.
did with
Well,
rentals.
Well, but
we
that's-
do with
Yeah,
the
for the
tax
lower
credit
loads.
properties,
That's
because they're
tax
different
credit,
than
though.
these.
Yeah.
The incomes are different than these.
Yeah.
And that's where we have the issues with, is just the tax credit, and they're rentals, it's not ownership.
I mean, I think the reason we made the 150 change was to not displace anybody that was
Exactly.
renting, right?
Right.
And I don't think you ever want to get to the point where you're kicking somebody out because they,
Make too much
Right.
money.
Well, they've been here and
Unless they're really too
if they're
far
making
over
a
and
lot
they
of
can
money,
afford
yeah,
free
maybe
market,
if
that to me is
they're
different.
taking advantage of a really low unit, but,
Mm-hmm.
at some point, that's fine too.
agreed. Is that clear?
I think so. Clear as mud.
We'll come back to you if we have questions.
Okay,
Yeah,
yeah, I
but
mean,
that was a really good discussion.
great.
Love dealing with clear,
Yeah, I
concise
mean,
stuff.
I think it was also interesting bringing the snowmass option
is,
for
yeah.
comparison,
Yeah.
just to show,
It is.
throws into greater relief what we're doing.
It
Yeah.
doesn't, and I mean, I think it, like I said, I think it makes a lot of sense to look at it that way.
But unscrambling that egg would take a lot of work.
Good analogy.
I don't know that-
I do just want to comment, like in closing thoughts on that, you know, the difference in that approach is it is comparing a market to assets, right? Whereas our system doesn't do that. And I think that we should have that conversation about sort of the market calibration. And I don't know, I'd be curious, to bring it back to our boards, because I'm not sure like it necessarily would need to change any approvals. You know, if we're just adjusting a unit that's always been a category 3 to reflect what a modern day category 3 is and take into account those HOA dues, you know, I would think that we would be able to keep those, you know, keep the integrity of the original approvals for that. So that's just a parting thought.
Yeah, and I think that could tie into the capital improvement discussion about what do you do with older properties that haven't been updated, and is there a way to increase the value of the properties as they trade? So much larger discussion. So with that, we will move, next item on the agenda, take a motion to move into executive session.
Oh, I didn't know we did that.
I will move to move into executive session to obtain legal advice from APCHA's attorney in accordance with CRS 24-6-4024B for a conference with the authority's attorney for the purpose of receiving legal advice on specific legal questions on the purchase of the property known as 16 Ajax.
Great. I'll second, and then just for further discussion, I assume GrassRoots will shut down, and
Yes.
so for the
Yeah.
viewing public,
We need 5
when we
minutes.
come back, there will be no ongoing discussion about any other issue. We're just coming back
There
to
will be no
adjourn the
viewing
meeting.
public, won't we? We're in executive session at that
No,
point.
but
Well, we have to come back to
afterwards,
end the
we'll just
meeting.
come back to end the
So,
meeting.
just so they
There
know
won't be any-
not to wait
any-
around,
yeah.
or to the press, whatever, we're not discussing anything. You're welcome, Megan.
So we have a motion, it's a roll call vote.
Yep. Kelly,
Yes.
John,
Yes.
Carson,
Yes.
Skippy,
Yes.
Allison.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, we will move into executive session, take a quick break, and come back just
Recording
as
stopped.
quickly as we can clear the room.